Hello and welcome to Manny Beal. A couple of days ago, Stefan Molyneux published another video um, about moral relativism, called "Moral Relativism is Control," and it's like I he's my favorite perversion, philosophical perversion or aversion, or whatever. My nemesis, what you. But how do you approach this, right? Or how do you explain that, or express that? That was what I was going for, right? It's like it's I don't want really to listen to him because the more I dig into what he's saying and his books and so on, the more crazy it seems to me, right? The more crazy he seems to me, and the more ignorant he seems about the shortcomings of his own philosophy. But I can't help it, right? It's like there's I might, when I try to sort of analyze myself, it might be because he was the first, let's say, quote, philosopher I listened to, and where I sort of got the this was when the penny dropped listening to him, right? After sort of a series of things, I started digging into this and digging into this, and it's sort of one thing took the other, and so on, right? And at some point, I stumbled on Stefan Molyneux and started listening to him, and the rabbit hole thing, right? And at some point, it dawned on me, it's not just but the monetary system or politics or this is sort of these cherry picked, but it's a foundational thing. You need to think foundationally there, and that's what is called philosophy, right? I have to give. I wouldn't give him credit for that. I can give credit to myself for realizing it, and he was just a spark that it ignited that for me, right? Now, so I don't want to give him too much credit, but at least he helped me realize philosophy was the path to go. Now, I am sort of at some point in the back seat of the car, and he's sort of the driver of the philosophy I was listening to as I, my philosophical driver's license, self-taught, autodidactive driver's license for philosophy. I became more and more and more sort of, I don't need him driving the car. I can drive it myself, right? And at some point, I wouldn't even, put him in the back seat and just listen to him now and then. I would sort of put him off the car, philosophical car, and put him at the side and let him, leave him behind, right? Sort of in this metaphor, right? But I can't help listening, and now it's not because I want to be sort of philosophically enlightened. It's just to clarify how stupid a lot of philosophers are, right? I might be crazy. I mean, I don't think that maybe that's a big, too strong a word to use, but it's. I'm not saying that my philosophy, as I might present it in my videos here, is perfect or anything like that, right? I'm always skeptical, right? I'm always skeptical. I wouldn't say I'm doubtful necessarily, but I am always skeptical in the broadest sense of the term, right? And something that is lacking in Stefan Molyneux is skepticism about his own philosophy, right? That he constantly sort of revisits his own thinking and sort of think, could there be something wrong if somebody says, I mean, he has his channel, man, right? He's talking to thousands of people about philosophical topics. Isn't there anyone who has been able to sort of ignite something? I mean, they might want to change something. No, it's like it is cut in stone in 2005. It is settled, and I'm just presenting my conclusions. Right now, the takeaway I would, if this is the only takeaway you have from my channel, then I'll be satisfied, right? Well, I would I wouldn't be satisfied maybe, but at least there will be something, right? That is, whenever somebody is presenting something they call their philosophy or philosophy, usually, right? Not their philosophy, they're saying philosophy, right? If they are not presenting how they got to try to get to conclusions, but just presenting the conclusions, right? Then they're not good philosophers, in my opinion, right? They don't understand what it is they're doing. Because when you're presenting philosophy, you are not attempting to give people the answers, but you are attempting to tell people how you got to the answers, right? That's also a cornerstone of what it means to be, for instance, scientific about things, right? It is, this is how I got to my conclusions, right? I didn't venture up on some, mountain peak and talk to some weird ghost who gave me a tablet that says do this, do that, right? No, it's like I looked at this thing and I measured this thing and it's these data and that data, and you can go check for yourself. You can make your own version of this experiment and you should be able to get to the same results and so on, right? It is describing how you get to the conclusion rather than giving you the conclusion, right? And that's why people like Dr. Fauci and these people are fucking dangerous and should be considered crooks and, completely, I wouldn't say evil, but they're saying, this is our conclusion, go do as you're told, right? It might as well be Moses coming down from the mountain saying, you have to do this as I talk to the sky ghost, right? There's no difference whether you call it this or that. You need to present how you do it rather than giving you the conclusions, right? Okay. When you're presenting your philosophy, which is those steps, those arguments, those kinds of thinking and axioms and definitions and so on, right? From the deepest levels of metaphysics and onwards, you might get to some conclusions, right? And you might need to have some, what's it called? Midway kind of conclusions in order to get to the next step and so on, right? But you have, of course, presented all the thinking that went into getting to that conclusion, right? And that is a prime example with Stefan Molyneux. He's just throwing around words or creating this sort of, smokescreen or shell game of words, and therefore my conclusion, right? Just listen carefully what he does. That is what most people do, right? They quickly get to the conclusion and say, my conclusion is this, right? And it's also, if you watch videos online of various, there aren't that many philosophers actually, but, Bernardo Castro maybe, right? It's always, the interviewer says, what's your conclusion on this? And what is your conclusion on that? And then the good philosophers say, no. It's not about the conclusion in the first place. It's about where do you start and how do you argue in order to get to those conclusions ahead, right? But then it's usually, well, my conclusion is this. And then they give some kind of justification for that conclusion, but that should be treated as an ex post facto justification. Because you should say, no, you can't start with a conclusion and, reverse engineering back to some starting point, right? You have to have the starting point and then work your way all the way up, right? Okay, let's head into some Stefan Molyneux. It's just below the 10-minute mark. So I should be able, potentially, to get through this within the hour, right? But I can't promise you anything because it's a tsunami of anger and words and shouting and everything you are, accustomed to when you're dealing with Stefan Molyneux, right? Okay, let's see.
Oh, righty. Hope you're doing well. So somebody wrote, definitions always give me trouble. Is moral subjectivity or relativism?
Definitions, well, good thing. Good thinking, listener, right? And just because they give you trouble doesn't mean you shouldn't just leave them by the side, right? You should stick to your definitions. And you should try to come up with definition. In order to define, in attempting to define something, you might find out there's some deeper thing you need to get to in order to do good philosophy, right? The listener is asking about definitions. He is having trouble with definitions. And I'll tell you why it's difficult to define things, right? Because most of the stuff that people need defining is abstractions, or are abstractions, right? They are abstractions, they are models, they are concepts, some kind, or categories of concepts like society, for instance, right? These things that are not experiential in nature, but derivatives, or second or third derivative of some kind of experience, right? Or based on it at least. They are difficult to define because you are very likely going to stay within abstractions. You're taking one abstraction, defining it by a new abstraction, and then you could ask, well, what's then the definition of the terms used to define this one, right? But then you need to define those terms. And you can keep doing this until you lose contact with what you're trying to define. And that points in the direction, not that you're bad at defining things, but those terms are not something that can be defined. You might be able to define them, but you have to start at the other end. You can't. Some intuitive kind of metaphysics and epistemology where you have been trained to use the term whatever, something, right? And then go and say, now I have to define it, right? Because if a term needs definition, and you can take some other words and use as the definition of that particular word, right? Then why are you not using that word instead? If that doesn't need definition, right? You should use that word that doesn't need definition instead of that word that needed a definition. Now, if that word doesn't need a definition, what kind of term is that? How do you get to something that doesn't need a definition? Maybe you can't get to a definition. That might be okay. But unless it's something that can't be defined, it must be able to be defined. So if that word that defines the first word need a definition, then you can go on forever, right? Unless you get to some point down the road where you can no longer define things. You have reached the bottom end of how you can possibly define. And I presented ideas of what that ground floor is, which is the qualia, right? The colors, the sounds, and so on. You can't get any deeper than that, right? So, in order for you to define some term up here, right? You have to follow all the definition all the way down. You ultimately either get so foggy in the term with the terms that are abstractions or ideas or hypothetical stuff, right? Abstractions. Yeah, well, let's stay with the term abstractions, right? That you get into some kind of superstring theory, everything is little strings vibrating, whatever, right? But then, okay, so everything is strings. That doesn't help me with that term up there, right? Or you get sort of lost in translation there, right? Lost in definition. Or you end with the metaphysical reduction base, in my opinion, right? Now, that's what I would expect him to talk about. But, he seems to be ignoring that, right? Let's get in.
Basically nihilism. Or is it a path to nihilism? Everything can be a virtue and a value, which also means nothing can. Subjectivity/relativism, there are no universal standards, really, so anything can be justified. Nihilism, nothing matters. Just do what you will. Okay. So...
Why does nothing matters, do what you will? Why does that follow? Why does do what you will follow from nothing matters? I don't see that. Not necessarily follow. I'm not saying it doesn't follow, But I don't see that it naturally follows, right? And if something matters, how do you get to being a little ahead of him here, right? But I'm just want to, rather than being after the fact, I'm trying to grab the points before he does it, right? I have watched this video through once, right? But it's a couple of days ago, so I don't remember it quite specifically. So it's almost like it's a new run through here, right? Why does that follow? It seems like this. It seems like this straw man argument that nihilism always, if it's like, if you don't say, yeah, I'm a moral person, I'm searching for virtue, then people are, if you don't say that explicit, people are going to say you're a nihilist and you don't care and you're more relativist and woo, and it's more like a scare scenario. It's in order to scare people into some kind of submission. That's how it comes across to me, right? And it's a way to say we are the good guys and they're the bad guys, right? It's always this good guy, bad guy, the good people, the bad people, sort of, dichotomy thing, where that person stating whatever it is they find moral are always on the good side, of course, right? Always, right?
What you need to understand about these things. So if somebody says to you, there are no standards, there are no objective values, no objective meanings, no objective...
See this tsunami of words, right? I have to go back now a bit, right? So I'm deconstructing this sort of one step at a time here, right?
What you need to understand about these things. So if somebody says to you, there are no standards, there are no objective values,
there are no standards, okay, but you can't argue from somebody saying there isn't, right? You can't use an argument. That's also something that is recurring with Stefan Molyneux. He grabs somebody who says this is not the case, and then he's going to say, oh yeah, you can't prove that it isn't the case, and therefore implicitly proving that I'm right. So that this indirect kind of approach to philosophical, proofs, right? I needed another word here. Hang on.
So, what you need to understand about these things. So if somebody says to you, there are no standards, there are no objective values.
Objective values, right? Now, what's the value, right? What is value, right? That is subjective, right? There needs to be some kind of subject, a person, an individual, or whatever term you want to use, valuing whatever it is being valued, right? There has to be a subject. And if there has to be a subject that values, then that value is subjective, right? You can't tell me what I should. I mean, you can't upgrade some of your value to an objective value and then say you should objectify this value, I'm telling you, right? Then you're just, bamboozling people into following whatever you want as an objective value, right? What does it mean that something is objective, right? That's not quite clear in his philosophy, in my opinion, right? It just seems to be, if I have experienced elephant, it's objective, right? That's what it sounds like to me, the way he argues, right? So how does it become, what's the difference between having a subjective, an experience? If I experience elephant, I'm the subject experiencing elephant, so that experience is subjective. It makes sense to me, right? What would I do in order to upgrade? Let's say it's objective is better than subjective, at least in his standards, as far as I understand it, right? So objective is an upgrade of subjective, right? Could be seen as such. What would I have to do in order to upgrade that elephant to objective, right? What would I have to do? What would it be about it that's, hey, now it's objective, right? It's the colors, it's the sounds, and whatever. I need those empirical data in order to get to elephant, right? Which is an cognitive abstraction of those particular qualia, right? It's subjective. It's my subjective experience. What's wrong with that? I'm cherishing my subjective experiences, right? So there's nothing about that experience that all of a sudden could upgrade it to objective, right? By that thing alone, right? I'm walking around alone on a deserted island. So everything I experience is constantly subjective, but there's nothing else added, right? I'm experiencing an elephant. There's nobody else to challenge my experience or, tell me whatever, right? There's nobody there to help me upgrade this thing, right? So if I'm alone, it must be completely subjective, everything, right? So if there's another person arrives, what makes that potential experience of elephant objective? What could possibly be considered objective, right? Well, in my opinion, the only thing that could be considered objective is if we agree on a proposition about that elephant, right? That's the closest thing you can get to an objectivity. If he says that's an elephant and points, right? And I say that's an elephant. He had made a proposition which is elephant, right? And I agree. And what do we agree about? We agree about the concept, not the qualia. Elephant is the concept derived from those experiences, right? Of color, sound, and so on, right? We don't agree about gray or trumpet sound, right? We agree about elephant. So the concept is what can be considered objective if we agree about that proposition about entailing that concept, right? That's the only way to get to something that is an upgrade of your subjective experience, right? It's two or more subjective experiences agreeing upon the conceptual part of the experience. Okay, so when you're dealing with elephants, right? You have the sounds and the colors and the conceptualization of elephant and so on, right? A value. What the hell is that then, right? Does value have a color? Does value have a sound? And so on. No. It is absolutely and purely and utterly subjective, right? So, good philosophy. I'm doing the philosophy here, right? I'm not giving you I'm hinting at some, conclusions, which is sort of an idea of what it means to be objective, right? Based on this philosophy I just presented, right? So another conclusion would be you can't have objective value, right? Because you can't get to any objectivity about it, right? There's no concepts within value that you can refer to, just like there was with the color and sound that made elephant, right? But there's not even any qualia to values, right? You might attach value to that elephant, but that's something you do with your mind personally after the fact of the conceptualization of the elephant, right? So, in my opinion, the conclusion of my philosophy is there is no objective value. So, and that's why I think this kind of thinking is good philosophy. I might be wrong about it. You might come up with something that is better. Then please present it to me. I would love to hear it, right? But what he does is, hey, they don't think they're objective values. Ooh, right? Ooh, implying that, of course, there are objective values, right? Sort of sophist shit here, right?
No objective meanings, no objective anything. They're lying.
Oh, they're lying. In order to know if somebody's lying, right? There has to be a discrepancy between the statement they're making and the thinking they have, right? The statement is based on some kind of thinking or mental experience of some kind, right? So if you are saying they're lying, you must be able to compare that statement with their thinking. Now, how do you have access to their thinking? Right? How? It's what is called the problem of other minds, right? You can't get to their thinking. You can only say, well, I have an experience of this, and because you say that which is in contradiction to that experience I have over there, I'm saying you must have that same kind of experience there, and therefore I know you're lying. No, you don't, right? You are stretching what it means to, let's say, what you can have access to, right? You can say, I am going with the idea, I'm going with the decision, I decide to go with the, let's say, axiom that they are lying in this, fine, but you have to state it as an axiom then, not as if it's something that you can reason your way to, right? Because you can't. You need to have experience of other people's experiences in order to check whether or not they're lying, right?
Lying to your face. It's, I hate to say an IQ test, but it's definitely a test of any expertise in philosophy. So somebody says to you, well, there's no such thing as
expertise in philosophy. Okay, so what he's trying to say, expertise in philosophy, is like, how good and strong are you in your philosophy, and how easily will you be, tilted over by some kind of sophistry, right? Okay, I can go with that.
as objective standards. It's like, okay, well, you just used objective definitions of words.
What? Objective? Now definitions are objective. Before there were objective values. Now there are objective definitions. A definition cannot be objective, right? Can you experience a definition? I mean, objective must be some kind of object, judging from the term, right? If it's objective, it's something about the status of that object that makes me considering it objective, right? You can't just throw around the term objective. Now I'm going to use it over here because it's just a strong word, right? Objective. It's more difficult to challenge it. If it's objective, you dare not challenge the objectivity of this, right? If you say subjective, it's like everybody can have their own opinion about this object, right? But if it's objective, it's like, hey, the wise men have spoken. This is objective, right?
To communicate to me that there's no such thing as objective definitions. Again, it's one of these IQ tests.
But the definition can't be objective, you fucking moron, man, right? Why don't you describe what you mean by objective, right? And it seems like you're using the term objective in all sorts of avenues, right? Suddenly it's sort of a value is sort of objective over here, and now there's a definition that can be objective, and let's see what other things that can be objective, right? It seems like objective is such sort of this hammer he's using. It's objective. You better not challenge it, right? Sort of this approach, right?
So, I mean, once you see it, right, nobody will be able to fool you again, right? So if somebody assembles a coherent sentence to you and communicates something, then
a sentence is an interpretation, right? It's not even a qualia. You make some sounds, somebody makes some sounds that you interpret as a language, or you interpret in a way, and that kind of interpretation is what is called language, right? That's not objective. That is your subjective interpretation of that experience, right? It's just your subjective experience. Because you are the subject experiencing those sounds that you interpret in a specific way, right? There might be others doing it similarly, but that doesn't make it objective, right? Because you're not pointing to some concept or some object and saying, is that this or that, right? And as I pointed out before, in my opinion, what can be knowledge or be considered objective is the concept. It's not the qualia, it's not the colors, it's not the sounds, it's not the taste and so on, because they are not specific to a particular object. When these particular sets of qualia condenses into a concept, let's say, right? Maybe condenses is a bad term. Let's just keep that, right? Then you have the concept, and the concept is the concept or it's not there, right? Either you experience elephant or you don't, right? But experiencing gray doesn't necessarily mean elephant. So experiencing sound cow doesn't necessarily mean there's an objective cow there, right? The sound cow is not the same as cow or the concept that cow refers to, right?
Then they cannot possibly communicate an argument that contradicts the form of their communication. The form of the communication is the argument. Discard everything that anyone is saying at any time, any place, and simply look at the form of the argument. Forget about the content. Everybody wants to jump over the form, jump straight into the content. Literally 90 to 95% of philosophical problems that you have with people or the people are trying to bamboozle you with can be solved by simply merely looking at the form of the argument. Somebody says to you, the senses are not valid. It's like,
who says the senses are not valid? Don't bring out these strawman arguments, right? Or out of the blue arguments, right? Stick to the question. Now I know it's an example and so on, right? But who the hell walks? I never heard anybody saying like that. Bring up something I could actually potentially experience in my everyday, right? Something that makes sense.
oh, you just use my senses to communicate that the senses are not valid. So you're lying to me. You're trying to.
But there's a difference, I mean, it's like he goes to extremes here, right? If it's either, he thinks it's either cut in stone, objective, or everything floats, right? There's no middle ground anywhere. There's no room for skepticism or doubt of any kind. It's either, it's fucking this way or the highway, right? It's either cut in marble, objectivity, and you better follow it, right? Or everything goes, right? It's like, it's this black and white thinking, right? Now, I might be somewhere in the middle where I say, yes, I could possibly get to objectivity, but it doesn't just pop into my experience just like that, because my experiences are particular to me, right? And, all these things he says here might also follow from his bad metaphysics, right? And I have tried to illuminate him on his show, discussing the problems of his sort of materialist approach to metaphysics, which is paradoxical or contradictory. It doesn't work. There's a problem there. He violates the dichotomy he creates in the inside-outside, split, right? He doesn't understand he's creating this problem. And then this problem is sieving through the rest of the philosophy, because all the other conclusions in his philosophy is of course derived from this basic stance of materialism, which is incorrect in my opinion. Incorrect might be not the best word to use, but at least there is a contradiction that is not dealt with. It is not explained how he gets to do what he does using this kind of metaphysics, because there's this built-in contradiction. I tried to spend an hour illuminating him, and he ended up yelling at me and muting me out of the conversation, right? So he basically doesn't have what it takes to be Mr. Art of the argument, right? He doesn't have it. He's just some guy that says, go away, my world is objective. I don't like subjectivity, me, right?
To manipulate and bamboozle me, right? Somebody says to you, there's no such thing as truth. Well, that's a truth statement.
But that's not what the guy asked you about, right? Why are you twisting it like, it's just sophist in nature, this, right? There's no such thing as truth. But and I've heard him using these kinds of arguments so many times, right? There's no such thing as truth, but truth is not a thing, right? Just to deconstruct it. I have my ideas in this sense of I created my ideas of metaphysics and epistemology maybe before, right? About concepts and knowledge and so on, right? And what it means to be true, right? Well, it's a reference to that. It's very simple, actually. It's a reference to that proposition, which is that's an elephant. Now, the elephant doesn't become true just because you made the proposition, but when you compare that proposition, which we both can hear, right? Using that language he referred to before, we can agree upon the concept. Right? When I hear that proposition, I hear the concept that is entailed in the proposition, and I can compare that to my experience, and then I can express true or false, right? And the reason why it's good to use the concepts as that which can be knowledge is because it's binary. Either you experience elephant or you don't experience elephant, right? It's either true or false. It's binary, right? It works. It's so fucking simple, man, right? Truth is not a thing. It's a conclusion from a proposition, right? When you compare that proposition to your own experience or your own cognition, you could say, right?
And claiming to make, therefore, right? And if somebody says to you, there's no such thing as objective standards, then I would say, well, why would you assemble the words in that order? Why don't you just say, flim flam bahuda, right? Well, because if there's no such thing.
But just because you are using a particular language doesn't make it objective. A language is not objective, you moron, man, right? There has to be some reference to some qualia. You are Mr. Empiricism, right? Apart from the other, you're also Mr. Art of the Argument, and you're Art of the Morality and Virtue and everything under the sun, the greatest philosopher of all time, right? Found the Holy Grail and so on. But language cannot be objective, right? Now, you can use language to establish objectivity, as I pointed out before, in my opinion. That's my philosophy, right? But that doesn't make the language objective, because you're using the language in order to establish objectivity, right? A sound is not an object. An object is what might be cognized from these qualia, like sounds and tastes and smells and colors and so on, right? I mean, you have to differentiate between these things. What I'm hearing is just some guy sitting there yelling in his echo chamber without any coherent philosophy underlining this. It's an emotional kind of thing. It's like he's dragging some anger and some frustration and just letting rip with words and shouting at the world, right? Yeah, okay, I'm completely on board with, using your emotions and so on, but use it to create some good philosophy, goddammit, right? Not just yelling words, people.
Thing is objective standards. Why are you using coherent?
Now, a standard can be objective, right? A value could be objective, a standard could be objective, and language could be objective, right? As far as I understand. So it's like, he's just labeling everything objective, right? Just out of the blue. It's a conclusion without philosophy. It's just an opinion without explanation, right? That's what I would treat it as, right? I don't buy it, man, right?
Structured objective definitions of words and grammar and structure and so on, right? If somebody says to you,
grammar and structure is not objective. It's a convention, right? Using the symbol 5 for a number of 5 entities of the same kind, there might as well be some other symbol, right? It doesn't have to look like 5. It could be some other symbol, and then we'll have gotten used to use that symbol instead, right? Why is that all of a sudden so fantastic, that particular symbol? Just because we have gotten used to using it, right? And everybody's using it, so it makes sense to use it. Just like everybody using Microsoft Office, because everybody else is using Microsoft Office and they want to be compatible, right? They don't want to be Open Office or whatever the new thing is that is sort of freeware, right? They're using Microsoft Office because everybody else is using it and they can talk together and all this shit, right? They're using the same basic sort of language, application and so on. That doesn't make it fucking objective, man. What an idiot, man.
well, you don't exist, or how can you prove to me that you exist? It's like, well, you're talking to me. So.
Oh man. How can you prove to me that you exist? But that's a good point. You are having an experience, you are talking to me, is you classifying your experience as somebody talking to me, But it's still just an experience, isn't it? It's colors, it's sounds, it might be taste if you're giving them a French kiss, right? And, or licking them in the ass or something like that. Or smell and whatever, right? It comes back to that. So what is the particular about that experience that makes me able to upgrade it to existing? Because if existing is outside my mind, right? Then why am I referring to experiences then? If it's outside my mind, because it can't. That existence can't be an experience if it's outside my mind. Because in order for it to be an experience, it must be inside my mind, right? So how do you square the circle? This is the paradox that is built into a stupid philosophy, right? If you say it's an existence, it's something that is outside your experience, well, then you can experience it, right? So if you're saying these colors, these sounds, and so on are experience, no, or sorry, existence, right? It can't be existence because it's an experience, and experiences are inside your mind, right? So if you're always referring to these experiences as being existence, you are contradicting yourself. You are creating a paradox. You are referring to something inside, which you then say is outside, right? How the fuck do you square that, Batman, right? You need to fucking get to this, right? Otherwise, in 500 years, all that people are going to remember you for is how stupid you are, right? You need to understand this.
So you accept that I exist because you're talking to me. So literally 90 to 95% of philosophical problems can be solved. And people don't like it because
Is it a philosophical problem? Now, me claiming that you exist or something like that is a philosophical problem. Well, if the problem is that you're saying we need to establish existence, I just pointing out to you before what contradiction is built into your philosophy now, right? You are not saying explicitly here, but implicitly you are pointing to the idea of materialism, that you have direct access to some outside your mind. How the hell do you have access to that if all you have access to really is your experiences, right? And you're constantly referring to those experiences, saying language and sounds and colors and explicitly right here. So you have to deal with this. You're not proving anything that's saying, I have a sound, therefore existence. It doesn't follow, right? It doesn't follow from pure reason, right? It doesn't. And I'll reject that anytime, right?
So it doesn't allow them to con you, right? Like somebody who has counterfeit money doesn't want a counterfeit detection machine that works right away, right? They don't want that, right? They just take the money and keep moving, right? So if somebody says to you, well, there's no such thing as objective value, well, clearly they're trying to communicate a truth to you. They're saying the truth is preferable to error objectively, because they're not saying it's my opinion, they're saying it is. There is
truth. Whoa. Truth is not opposed by error. You fucking idiot, man, right? What's the matter with you, man? It's not truth or error, right? What's your problem, man? Right? Oh. It's true versus false, right? It's not true versus error. Where the hell did you dig this up, right? If I'm stating that's an elephant and I'm talking to you, you can say what you want, I guess, but if you want to refer to the proposition I made, and propositions, which I would call that a proposition, right? Propositions are known to be those that can either be true or false, right? That's the idea of a proposition. So if I propose that's an elephant and point, right? And the pointing is actually quite important because we are talking about space and time also, right? We are within space and time, or the understanding of space and time. We could go into how we understand space and time another day, right? If I'm pointing and you say, yeah, that's an elephant, right? You are affirming, you're basically saying your proposition is true. If you're saying that's not an elephant, you're saying my proposition is false. Now, if I'm experiencing elephant, right? And you're saying that's false, I would start to think there's probably something wrong with this dude, right? But I can't tell you you're wrong. because I don't have your experience or the lack of it, right? I'll have to accept that it's wrong, it's false to you, right? I have to accept that you consider that proposition false. Then I would say, okay, let me just go this way, right? Slowly backing off. This guy is crazy, right? But if and it's equally necessary if somebody else says that's an elephant and point, and I see a goat, right? I would say that's false, and I will fucking stick to my statement that it's false. It's not an error, right? If I experience goat and somebody points and says that's an elephant, I would say false proposition, right? I wouldn't say error proposition. I would say false proposition and slowly back out, right? Oh, man.
There's no such thing as objective value.
So now they're also all of a sudden back to objective values. He's sort of jumping all over the place with these huge philosophical topics, right? Just by, hey, you made a sound, therefore existence. So this kind of argument, right? And now we're back to objective values and so. Oh, man, what kind of fucking self-imposed nightmare is he living in, man, right? Oh.
Well, why would you tell me that? Are you saying that it's better for me to understand that there's no such thing as anything better than the other? Right? I mean, again, none of it makes any sense.
No, but you might think that all you want. That just doesn't make it objective out of the blue, man, right? You might have your own preferences or whatever you want to call them. But don't fucking impose them on me, right? Because I have my own, right? Don't fucking tell me what I should or shouldn't value. Or what grade or level of value compared to something else I value or don't value or whatever, right? Don't fucking lecture me on my valuations.
It's all complete Machiavellian power-grabbing nonsense. Like, once you understand human beings, we are functionally incapable. We are functionally incapable of comparing proposed actions to ideal standards. We can't.
Proposed actions to ideal standards. He mentioned objective standards before. Now it's ideal standards, right? Now he's twisting the words around. Why did it also all of a sudden become ideal standards rather than objective standards? I would like to understand these objective standards he's referring to, right? But that's not important. No. They're objective standards, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. No. Now they are actually ideal standards, right? So what is ideal compared to objective? Is there a one-to-one connection between ideal and objective, or what? If I say that's an elephant and I consider that objective, or we agree maybe on an objectivity on an elephant, does that all of a sudden become an ideal elephant or something like that, right? So when we're dealing with values and standards of these things, how the hell do they become objective or ideal? How do you get to it, right? As Gelson has started out this video here, when people give you the answers as he does here, right? They're not good philosophers because they're not giving you the philosophy. They have done the philosophy, so you just need the answers. Just obey my authority, right?
Can't do it. We can't avoid doing that. Once you understand that's the human mechanism, then if somebody can convince you, well, there's no such thing as objective value, then the moment you start thinking of objective values, you'll have this ideal standard called, well, there's no such thing as objective values, and you will nullify that.
No, but what would be, and give me an example of an ideal or objective value. Give me a fucking example, man, right? What makes it objective? Just because you like some kind of value, right? And whatever and value entails, I'm not sure what that means in this context here, right? It sounds like it has something to do with morality or moral principles or something like that. It's sort of the first stepstone before towards some kind of moral principle, that there are values that are good and you should adhere to them, and therefore this moral principle, something like that, right? So he's sort of grooming you a bit here, right? It feels like. I'm not saying he's necessarily incorrect in all he says. I'm just saying he's exquisitely lame at arguing or presenting philosophy is basically just throwing words at you or conclusions at you, right?
Within your own mind. We are objective-seeking machines. We are ideal standard-seeking machines. And people will constantly deploy that against...
Really? Are we ideal standard-seeking machines? Don't call me a machine, right? Speak for yourself, right? I think that most people, when it gets down, what they're looking for is adherence to whatever everybody else does, right? In Nazi Germany, all of a sudden there was a lot of Nazis, right? Wow! When there was a Nazi leadership, all of a sudden there were lots of Nazis, right? Oh, in Syria, there are lots of Muslims, because there are lots of Muslim parents, right? So the standard you are talking about in this sort of general average, mainstream version is basically adherence to whatever parents says you should do, right? That's what I see. I don't think people are in general philosophical, meaning searching, principle hunting, whatever. No, they see what are all the others doing. I'm going to do the same. I don't want to be the nail that sticks out and get hammered down, right?
Against you, in order to cripple you, in order to invalidate anything that you might do to block their use of power.
So you didn't create exceptions, but now there is an exception to this meaning and principle search, right? There are apparently these evil people who wants to destroy your sense. So they're not searching for the principle. They want to manipulate you rather. So now there are two categories without you mentioning that you had actually created a new kind of being there, right? A new kind of mental construct in those beings that are different from those, virtuous, meaning, principle-seeking people, right?
Or over you. So a lot of postmodernists will say, well, there's no such thing as truth, there's no such thing as value.
No, but have you... I mean, you can't just keep stating, these people are saying there's no such thing as truth. Why don't you give us some examples of their philosophy and how they get to this? They might be right, God damn it, right? You can't just refer with these short snippets, right? Go and find some decent philosophy where they arrive at this conclusion and show where in that philosophy
right?
they go wrong. I don't like this conclusion, therefore I have a different conclusion, you better eat it. That's the most stupid kind of philosophy. It's actually not philosophy. If anything, it's sophistry, right?
Okay, so if there's no such thing as truth and there's no such thing as value, then there's no truth value in communicating that. If nothing's better than anything else, you would never bother to communicate that.
No, I would agree on that, right? The statement is self-contradictory in that case, because you can't know it, you can't get to it, but it seems a reasonable conclusion to draw that if you want to tell me how I should think, you value that thinking, because everything people does is based on some kind of incentive, and that incentive is very likely based on some value creation of some kind in their mind in the future based on those manipulations, right? So at the end of the day, those kind of manipulation may stem from our idea of value creation. So if there's no value, it doesn't in the first place make sense that you're trying to manipulate me into have a certain understanding of value, right? I will agree with that.
To anyone, right? I mean, is it objectively true that red is a better color than blue? No, I mean, just personal
objectively true. Now, truth can be objective, right? I mean, oh, man. This objectivity is some kind of fetish he has, right? It's like, it's a mantra. It's a, what's it? It's the powerful term that you slap onto your philosophy in order to convince people you're right. Right? Just use the term objectivity and see how far you can get, right?
preference, what you happen to like, except with eye color. Totally sexy. Right, so there's no objectively better color. I mean, just talking about subjective preference, like, you know, what color car should you buy? What's the objectively best color? Nobody can say that. So there's no morality of...
Okay, so so it's not the color of, for instance, modern art you don't like, but it's the way the colors are placed on, for instance, the on the cloth, right? That you don't like. So if the colors, it's not whether it's red or blue, it's the way, the blemishes they make that you don't like about modern art, right? So what is it about? It's not the colors then, because that's not something that can be objective, right? So if there's something, or you see a Jackson Pollock painting, it's just red, blue, green, brown, black, white, whatever, right? So you can't complain about the colors, but then is it the way the colors are dripped upon the, on the, what's it called? The cloth, what's it called? Painting stuff, right? The, what's it called? Linen? No, not linen. I have the Danish word, but you won't understand that, right? Unless, of course, you're Danish. So it's, again, these fluffy things, right? He's living in his abstractions, basically, right?
car colors, right? There's something that, it's a matter of personal taste and so on. So people aren't sitting there saying, well, it's evil to want a red car and it's virtuous and noble and good.
Who the hell in the fucking wide world would say something like that? Have you ever heard anybody say anything remotely like this, right? It's these kind of straw man argument, some weird kind of straw man he's using to convince you about whatever it is he's trying to... It's stupid, right? Start from the ground floor, right? And work your way up to whatever it is you want to argue for, right? Why don't you do that? You never do that. You never did that, right? You have never done that. Even in your essential philosophy, which is an insult to call itself philosophy, or you calling it philosophy, right? Using the term philosophy in connection with that book is an insult to the idea of philosophy. Basically, what I'm trying to get at maybe is that this guy is not a philosopher, man, right? He's just a megalomaniac living in his, his paranoia. That everybody's out to get him, right? If they don't toe the line of objective truth, whatever idea she has in it, they're out to get me. They're maniacs. They are postmodernists who want to destroy the world, right? So he wouldn't be able to identify a good philosophy that didn't toe the line, because he's living in this paranoia, right? So anybody coming along who can philosophize decently, which I would count myself as, right? But doesn't toe the same line as him, he wouldn't be able to identify, right? So either you toe the line and he will lick you in the ass, or you say you're nice and should give him some money, or you are out to destroy the world, right? It's this black and white thinking, right? It's not healthy.
Good, right, to want a blue car. And there aren't people saying to you that you must choose one car, or you're a bad person if you don't, right? And...
Well... Okay, we are getting close to the 1 hour mark. At least I got 5 minutes into it, so this is probably going to be a two-parter, right? Oh, but it's also, with this guy, it's a tsunami of words, right? So and it's all over the place, right? It's all over the place. It's sort of 10 minutes of word salad tsunami, right? And you're just covered in words, right? When you're done. Oh, man. I'm not trying to, this guy is not good at philosophy. But the only hope I might have is that I might at some point be able to convince him that his metaphysics is bad, right? And I would like to see what that would entail, right? How would he handle that? Now, that's the only goal I might have, right? The only hope I might have. Otherwise, I don't care one freaking bit about any of his philosophy as such, other than I want to point out how shitty it is, right? So, share, like, and subscribe. Please consider the Discord board. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, have a nice day. See you next time.